Good evening. All of you are most welcome for the second lecture in web series we started from the IIA Mumbai chapter. Uh, this lecture is given by Dr. Supratik Roy Chaudhary, who has a lot of experience in the work in the field of corrosion. He will give you not only a brief basics of the corrosion but gives lot of practical examples from that. I hope you will enjoy this lecture. And prior to this, a short introduction of IM will be given by our chairman, Dr. Vivekanand King.
Welcome to this event organized by the Indian Institute of Metals Mumbai chapter. I am Vivekanand Kane, chairman of the Mumbai chapter of the Indian Institute of Metals. I am going to give you a glimpse of the Indian Institute of Metals and specifically the typical activities that Mumbai chapter organizes for its members. The idea for the institute was conceived in 1945, and a small group of metallurgical professionals based at Bombay, that time they had formed the Bombay Metallurgical Society, played a key role. So from 1945, several people including Bombay Metallurgical Society, started working on this idea of formation of a national level of institute. The institute was inaugurated in 1947 with 42 founder members and 11 council members. The institute was inaugurated on 29th of December 1947 by Shri Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Minister for Industry and Supply at that time. Shri Jahangir Gandhi was the first president and Dr. Dara P. Antia was the first honorary secretary of the institute, and the office space at Calcutta was provided by the House of Tatas. Although the institute was inaugurated in 1947, the seed for that was through this council which was formed earlier, and the first organizational meeting was held on 24th of February 1946. Therefore, the Indian Institute of Metals in February 2021 will be starting its 75th year celebrations. At that time, several international institutes, including the Institute for Metals UK and the Institute of Iron and Steel UK, they advised that India should not go for separate institutes for each subtopic in the field of metallurgy and materials. Therefore, right from that stage, the scope of the institute included all the topics such as mineral beneficiation, extraction of materials, fabrication of materials, heat treatment, finishing, as well as practical and theoretical aspects of metallurgy of all ferrous and non-ferrous metals and alloys, including ceramics and other disciplines and technologies which come in the broad field of metallurgy and materials. The vision of the institute includes increased global visibility for the IIM, cooperating with the related government departments on policy formulations, focused services to be provided to industry with higher degree of industry-specific interaction, as well as career development and encouraging young metallurgists. The annual general body of the Indian Institute of Metals is typically held at the end of July of every year. And so last month itself, we had Dr. Amol Gokhale taking over as the president of the institute. As I told you, institute has three divisions through which it operates. These divisions are Ferrous Division, Metal Sciences Division, and Non-Ferrous Division. Ferrous Division is chaired by Shri T.V. Narendran, who is also the Vice President of the Institute. Metal Sciences Division, the chairman is Dr. Samir Kamath. He is the Vice President of the Institute. And Mr. Satish Pai is the chairman of the non-ferrous division and vice president of the institute. The Indian Institute of Metals has more than 10,000 members. Transactions of the Indian Institute of Metals is an international journal, and the impact factor of this journal in the last 1 year itself has jumped to a very high number under the editorship of Professor Murthy. IM Metal News is a bi-monthly publication provided to all the members, and IM and TIFEC, Government of India body, had published a series of strategy cum source books on non-ferrous metals and alloys. The National Metallurgist Day is the annual event which is held along with the annual technical meeting of the institute. NMD is the day when the institute, along with the Ministry of Steel, Government of India, recognize the excellent work done by the metallurgical fraternity members in the country. The institute gives away, or through the institute, the Ministry of Steel gives away these following awards: Lifetime Achievement Award, National Metallurgist Award, Metallurgist of the Year Awards, and Young Metallurgist of the Year Awards. At the same time, the winner of the Professor Brahm Prakash Memorial Quiz are also given the awards. This is a national level quiz for students which is held every year. Students of 11th and 12th standard participate in this quiz. All the 57 chapters, they hold the chapter level memorial quiz, and the winner from each chapter that team is sent for the national level quiz. This is a very popular program of the institute. The institute on NMD Day also gives various awards. These are Indian Institute of Metals awards. There are IM honors, including honorary membership and fellowship, National Sustainability Awards, and Best Chapter Awards, apart from several individual awards, some of which are listed here. Coming to the Mumbai chapter specifically, Mumbai chapter is a vibrant chapter. It's a large chapter, classified as a large chapter, and it has 3 pillars. Members basically come from the Department of Atomic Energy, Bhabha Atomic Research Center, IIT Mumbai, and from several industries which are in and around the Mumbai region. The chairmanship, currently I am the chairman, and Professor Indradev Samajdar is the vice chairman. The secretaries also are from these respective organizations at this time: Dr. Raghavendra Tiwari from BRC and Professor Prasad from IIT Bombay, and our treasurer is Dr. D.K. Singh. We start the year with the C.V. Sundaram Memorial Lecture just before the annual general body meeting, and look at the various evening lectures which were conducted during the year. Some of these lectures with different organizations including ASM, NACE, IIT Bombay, etc. And some were organized by the Mumbai chapter itself. But you look at the topics starting from the titanium alloys to aircraft turbine engines to uranium and its scope in the country and in the world, various aspects of it, radiation effects in materials to corrosion resistance to coatings and thin film solar cell materials. This covers a wide spectrum of topics which were offered to the members of the IM Mumbai chapter. Mumbai chapter also hosted the National Council meeting at Mumbai on 2nd of October. Industrial visit is a key part of our activities. This year, during 1920, in the month of December, our members went to the Everest Canto Cylinder Company at Tarapur, and a national conference was organized on rare earths, science, technology, and applications of rare earths. The C.V. Sundaram Memorial this year in 2020 will be delivered by Dr. Madan Gopal Krishnan, Director Materials Group. Apart from this C.V. Sundaram Memorial lecture, which the Mumbai chapter organizes, Mumbai chapter and Baroda chapter together also organize Y.M. Mehta Memorial Lecture. So 1 year it is organized by Mumbai chapter and the next year it is organized by the Baroda chapter. So I urge you to become a member of the institute, and to become the member, you simply have to go to the website which is mentioned here, im-india.net, and fill up the forms there and you will become a member of the institute. Kindly visit that and be a part of the activities which Mumbai chapter holds and the Indian Institute of Metal holds for its members. Thanks.
Yeah, hello friends. I am Supratik Roy Chaudhary. I'm working in corrosion science section of Bhava Atomic Research Center since 1998. Topic of my today's talk is aqueous corrosion of metals and alloys, forms of corrosion and its mitigation. So in this talk, I will cover basics of corrosion mitigation, forms of corrosion, and I will also highlight some simple steps that can be taken in an operating plant so as to minimize this problems related to corrosion. So it's time to revisit this basics again because of this. And I also like to thank Indian Institute of Metals, Mumbai chapter, for giving me this opportunity to make this presentation. So this is a brief outline of the talk. I will start with the historical perspective of corrosion. So mankind from history, so they had a requirement of tools, weapons in their day-to-day lives. And in the new Stone Age, starting around 10,000 BC, stone was used for tools and weapons. And the problem of corrosion was not faced by humans at that time because stones being found naturally are not prone to corrosion. And the problems of corrosion started with the onset of the Metals Age, which was the Copper Age around 5000 BC, then to the Bronze Age. So Copper Age, of course, initially copper was found in the native state. It was much easier to work with as in comparison to stones. You can just beat copper into the shape that you want to. And humans also found that by beating copper, it hardens. So it was heated to make it soft. So metallurgy was born when copper was melted from its ores. But pure copper was not very amenable for use as a cutting tool and weapons because it got blunted easily. And that problem was solved by alloying with tin. So then started the Bronze Age. So you can see this figure of the dancing girl, the famous figure, dancing girl from the Indus Valley civilization. So alloying made it amenable to use, amenable for use as weapon and cutting tools. Subsequently, the Iron Age started around 1200 BC. So when man produced iron, humans produced iron by smelting its ore. It is much more difficult than copper smelting because of the high melting point of iron, and thus ferrous metallurgy was born. The first use of iron was documented around 3000 years BC, but that iron was sourced from meteors. So it was an iron nickel ore, so it was being very rare, highly sought after, more expensive. But with the onset of ferrous metallurgy, there was more widespread use of iron, and humans realized that iron can be various mechanical properties, and various properties can be achieved by its heat treatment and processing routes. And thus the problem of corrosion also started at that time. So corrosion, the word originates from the Latin word corrodere, which means to gnaw away. So the metal is eaten away by this environment. So the first historical mention of corrosion was given by Pliny the Elder in 77 AD, where he mentioned iron as spoilt iron. So iron getting spoilt due to interaction with the environment. Subsequently, there was not much research done till around 1819, where the electrochemical phenomena of corrosion was proposed, and the laws of electrochemistry was finally formalized by Faraday in 1834 to 1840. Subsequently, humans realized that alloying now iron with chromium increases its corrosion resistance. So it was patented in 1865, which paved the way for discovery of stainless steels in 1913 in Sheffield, UK. In 2013, we celebrated the centenary year of discovery of stainless steel. But this problem of corrosion still persists, and it said that corrosion eats away around 1 to 5% of our nation's GDP as direct cost, and an equal proportion as an indirect cost. So just imagine if we can minimize this wastage of due to corrosion by taking adequate steps during design, fabrication, operation, and proactive management, so that the amount of money is available, becomes available for use in other social causes. So that's why prevention of corrosion, mitigation of corrosion is very important. So I'll now come to some basic principles of corrosion. So what's the driving force of corrosion? So as I told you, metal, when it's extracted from its ores, a lot of energy goes into the metal to bring it to a high energy state. And metal is present in the nature as ores, that is oxides of metal. So if we take the example of iron, it's an iron oxide. So iron will always tend to go back to its native state. So similarly, every metal will have that tendency. So here I have taken two examples of copper and magnesium. Copper is less prone to corrosion as magnesium. So when it's exposed to water, copper will tend to ionize and go into the solution as Cu+2 ions by this reaction, leaving behind 2 electrons on the surface. Magnesium being more prone to corrosion, more of ions will be present in the solution and more of negative charge on this metal. So there's a potential difference develops between this negative charge on the metal and the positive ions in the solution, and this potential difference is the main driving force for corrosion. And this potential difference under standard conditions is called the standard electrode potential, and is related to this free energy change for this reaction. The potential is a very strong function of the environmental condition, like increase in dissolved oxygen level, temperature, concentration of ions, and concentration of oxidizing species will change this potential. This electrode potential is a measure of the oxidizing potential of this environment. So higher the oxidizing potential of the environment, that is, if it's highly corrosive, then the electrode potential will also be high. So just by measuring this electrode potential, we have an idea about the oxidizing nature of this environment. So another concept, electrochemical nature of corrosion, as the name suggests, we have a chemical reaction, and there is also a flow of charge, flow of electrons. Okay. So in any electrochemical reaction, you will have one anode and a cathode. Anode is the site where the oxidation reaction occurs. Oxidation means this reaction, the metal M becoming an M plus N ion, which goes into the solution, leaving behind N electrons in this metal. So since the metal is lost, you can see here schematically it is shown the metal is getting corroded away. So all corrosion reactions occur at the anode. Now these electrons have to be consumed at the cathode. So there are various reactions that are occurring. There are various possible reactions that can occur for this electron consumption. Now if we just take these two reactions for an acidic medium. So if you see, the only difference between these two reactions is the presence of oxygen. If oxygen is present in the solution, you require 4 electrons. And if it is not present, oxygen is not present, it requires 2 electrons. And from where these electrons are coming? From this single reaction. So if you say, if oxygen is present in the solution, the corrosion rate goes up because the electron consumption reaction is, more of electron is consumed. Similarly, if you have ionic impurities, highly oxidizing ions like Cu+2 or Fe+3, they also take up electrons. So these are again additional cathodic reactions. So the more number of cathodic reactions you occur, more of demand is there for the electron, and all those electrons are sourced from only one reaction, the oxidation reaction. So we straight away come to the first basic corrosion mitigation method: remove oxygen. So in deaerated condition, oxygen, if you remove oxygen, the corrosion rate comes down. Similarly, if you remove the ionic species, or if you use pure water, then also the corrosion rate will come down. Another important concept is of passivity. I told you that alloying with chromium increases the resistance to corrosion. So the alloys will, so here if you see in this figure, the corrosion rate comes down with increase in chromium content, but around 11% you see there is a drastic reduction in, the corrosion rate. So minimum an iron alloy, ferrous alloy containing minimum 11% chromium is called stainless steel, because it will not rust anymore. So if I compare, how does it compare these two alloys, stainless steel as well as compared to carbon steel or low alloy steel? So it is given schematically in this figure. So y-axis is the solution oxidizing power, x-axis is the corrosion rate. If for carbon steels or low alloy steels, the corrosion rate will keep on increasing with increase in this oxidizing potential. Okay, so but on the contrary, for the stainless steels, there is an increase, linear increase, but beyond a certain point, corrosion rate, there is a drastic reduction, and this low corrosion rate is maintained for a wide range of oxidizing potentials. And of course, when oxidizing potential become too high, then again the corrosion rate increases. So this is the region where you have very low corrosion rate, even though the material is anodic. Yeah. So what is the reason for this? The main reason is the presence of this passive film, which is a chromium oxide, which forms due to exposure of stainless steel with this oxygen in air. It's highly adherent, highly protective as compared to rust. Rust is non-adherent flaky film. Of course, rust is also oxide, but not adherent flaky. Passive film is highly adherent, very thin, and highly protective. It cuts out the supply of environment to the base metal and reducing corrosion rate. Because of its low thickness, it is transparent. So passive film forms due to anodic reaction, as I told you. And the beauty is it is spontaneously reforms. If it reformed, if it is broken due to scratching or due to handling, it is it reforms spontaneously. And you can realize that you need an oxidizing conditions for this passive film to be stable. So these such alloys work well under oxidizing conditions. Even though uniform, but they have a different set of problem, which are localized forms of corrosion that we will see later on. So we will see some now come to some common factors affecting corrosion. So first we'll see the effect of oxygen and oxidizers. There are various kind of behavior possible. You can either behavior one is the increase in oxidizing condition, oxidizing agent or oxygen. There is a linear increase in corrosion. Okay, so this is you can understand it is for an alloy which does not passivate, like iron in aerated water. Okay. Second example or second possibility is that the current the corrosion rate increases, and when this oxygen concentration exceeds the minimum value, a certain value, then the corrosion rate drastically again falls. Okay, and it's maintains a very low value of corrosion rate for a wide range of concentration of this oxygen. So this is again because of passivity that I explained in the previous slide. So, and if the concentration becomes too high, then it goes into the transpassive range where the corrosion the passive film degrades and dissolves. So in the like titanium in HCl, it shows only region 1 and 2. So it means that till about very high concentration of acids also transpassivity is not seen. Whereas in say SS304 and nitric acid, you can see all the 3 regions depending upon what is the concentration of this oxidizing environment. So this was the effect of oxygen. Let's see the effect of flow velocity. Again, there are different possibilities like curve A, there's an increase, linear increase in the corrosion rate, and then there's a sudden fall, and thus a low corrosion rate is maintained. So as you can understand, so this is due to this mainly active passive transition. So what does flow have to do with it? So if there are any diffusion control reactions, so diffusion control reaction means this oxidizing species has to reach to the surface in order to form this passive film. If this oxidizing agents do not reach this solution or reach the surface of the metal, passive film will not form and it will keep on corroding. Whereas in flowing conditions, what happens? It aids in delivery of these oxidizing species or oxygen to the surface of the metal and helps in passivation. So in flowing conditions, it will passivate easily. So for metals with passivate, it's good. It performs well in oxidizing environment, also in flowing conditions. Second possibility is that B. So there is little or no effect of flow, like in curve B. So these reactions are not here. The reactions are not controlled by diffusion, like iron and dilute acid. It will keep on corroding irrespective of the flow velocity. Another possibility is like C, where the corrosion rate is low to start with, then beyond a certain flow velocity, there is a sudden increase. So this is mainly due to the start of like mechanical effects, erosion, corrosion coming into the picture. So similarly, for example, is iron in concentrated H2SO4. It forms a stable or protective ferrous sulfate layer, which gets removed at higher flow velocities, exposing the base metal and further corrosion occurring. Sorry. Effect of temperature. Again, two possibilities. Possibility A, where you see an increase in temperature will cause an increase in your corrosion rate. This is understandable because increase in temperature will always increase reaction kinetics. Yeah. So the corrosion rate will also consequently increase. Another possible behavior is like this curve B. So in curve B, what happens is with increase in temperature, the corrosion rate does not increase, but beyond a certain temperature, it increases rapidly. Again, if you remember, I told you that oxidizing potential also, nature of the environment also depends upon temperature. So increasing temperature means the oxidizing potential is increasing. If you have a stable passive film, nothing, there is no increase in corrosion rate. But if temperature increases such that the transpassive region is reached, then this passive film will degrade and transpassive dissolution will start. So two kind of behavior you can see, behavior A and behavior B. Another effect of concentration of corrosive species. So like this is two types of behavior. We'll first see the behavior A. So again, this is mainly for passive metals. So you can see again, initially to start with, we have a passive film. So corrosion rate will be very less, even though the corrosion concentration of corrosive species increases. And beyond a certain point, then transpassive region starts and there is a rapid increase in this corrosion rate. So for example, 304 SS304 in nitric acid, austenitic stainless steel in nitric acid. For very high concentration of nitric acid, transpassive region is reached and it will start corroding at a high rate. This increase in corrosion rate can also occur at very low concentration also. So this is mainly pertaining to presence of chlorides. If chlorides are present, then this corrosion rate increases again rapidly at very low concentrations of chlorides. So this is mainly due to pitting corrosion in alloys which rely on passivity for corrosion protection. Another possible behavior is this curve B, for example, like iron in sulfuric acid. So for sulfuric acid to be corrosive, it has to ionize to give these two H plus ions. This H plus ions takes up this electron by this cathodic reaction. So that makes this acid corrosive. So increase in corrosion concentration of H2SO4 increases concentration of H plus. So your corrosion rate will keep on increasing. But beyond a certain point, if the acid concentration increases too much, then this ionization does not occur. So H plus ions are not available and corrosion rate will come down. At very high concentrations, iron is virtually unattacked. So if you see in this figure, this is isocorrosion chart. So if you see very high concentration of sulfuric acid, around excess of 95%, corrosion rate is very less, around 0 to 5 mils per year, if the temperature is not very high. So carbon steel is used for storing sulfuric acid as long the acid is highly concentrated and it is not contaminated with any water or moisture. We'll see the effect of some metallurgical variables. Grain boundaries are inherently more prone to corrosion as they are high energy regions. So fine grain material can have a tendency to corrode to higher corrosion. Single phase alloys are usually more resistant to corrosion than multi-phase alloys because in multi-phase alloys you can have some galvanic cells setting up. Impurities present like sulfur, phosphorus also affects corrosion rate. Inclusions, oxide, sulfide inclusions also affect corrosion rate. Localized stress and strain will also affect corrosion rate. Local differences in composition in the alloy will also affect. Very pure alloys have very good corrosion resistance, but they have very negligible engineering application. Yes, just to summarize, so what kind of metals? If I take two kinds of metals, one is stainless steel which passivate and other is steel which does not passivate. If you have oxygen in the environment, the stainless steel is good, steel is not good for obvious reasons because this does not passivate. In reducing conditions, stainless steel is not good, whereas carbon steel or steel is good because here again passive film is not stable. For stagnant conditions, stainless steel is not good, steel is good. For low flow conditions, stainless steel is good. So for flowing conditions where the flow velocity is low, stainless steel performs well, whereas steel is not good if this diffusion control processes are controlling the corrosion reaction. For very high flow conditions, both are not good because erosion, corrosion, mechanical effects come into the picture and both will corrode. If you have a chloride containing environment, then stainless steel or passive film is not stable and it is definitely not preferable. Steel is preferable over stainless steel. Even though steel will corrode, it will be general corrosion, that is uniform corrosion, that will see is easier to maintain or easier to control. Some basic principles of corrosion mitigation. First comes material selection. So for corrosion mitigation, so this you have one has to take adequate measures right from the before the material is put into service. That starts with material selection. There are some typical natural material environment combinations like stainless steel with in oxidizing environment, nickel based alloys monel in reducing environment. So these are typical combinations. For a highly oxidizing environment, seawater titanium is used. For highly concentrated sulfuric acid, steel is good enough. So rules, what are the rules? Reducing non-oxidizing environment, should use nickel, copper and the alloys. Oxidizing conditions, chromium containing alloys like stainless steel, they are good enough. For highly oxidizing conditions, titanium and its alloys. And the alloy should have minimum impurity. The impurity level should be very low, like sulfur phosphorus levels should be very low. They provide good corrosion resistance. Of course, stainless steel is not the best material. It depends upon the application. It's prone to various localized forms of corrosion like pitting, crevice, stress corrosion cracking, IGC. So the choice of material depends upon the cost. Economics comes into the picture. Availability, ease of fabrication, forming, welding. So everyone, it's obvious to go choose a material which has the best corrosion resistance, but it also tends to be the most expensive. So you have to make a cost balance between the cost and the return of on investment. So based on that, you will choose a material. Some design modifications that you can make right at the design stage before the material is put into service. So for uniform corrosion, provide corrosion allowance. That means provide an extra additional thickness. It's possible only for uniform corrosion, not effective. This step is not effective for localized forms of corrosion. It means if you know the corrosion rate, if you know how long that structure will last, just multiply the two, it will you will get the total thickness that will be lost. So thus, just provide that additional thickness in your component so that even though it corrodes uniformly, you will still have residual thickness remaining after its design life. Some more design principles that one should use. Crevices should be avoided at all costs. Like two metals in physical contact, you can have crevice here. There is a tight gap in between. So they should be avoided. So that leads to crevice corrosion. So instead of riveting, you do welding. One should do welding because rivets form this crevices very easily. Allow for easy drainage, like this is a tank. I'm sorry, this stick should have been here. So this is a better design. So when you the design is such that it will empty completely, there will be no stagnant pockets. Whereas in this design, this is not good. So even though you try to drain, it will not drain out completely and even liquid traps. If you have a threaded design, they act as a stress concentration, location of stress concentration, which is not good. Also, it provides location as stagnant region. So instead, avoid threaded joints, rather solder, braze, or weld wherever possible. Avoid dissimilar metal contact. Wherever you have dissimilar metal contact, you have one becomes the anode, other becomes the cathode, and the anode corrodes. So which is not good. So try to provide insulation. So to break the electrical contact between two dissimilar metals. Avoid sharp bends, and when there is a rapid direction in flow. So like in this case, these regions will be prone to impingement kind of attack or due to erosion corrosion. So rather make a design like this. So this flow like gently mixes with this flowing steam and there is no impinging action here. You can also provide some additional thickness here, deflector or baffle plate that will increase the life of this component. Cathodic anodic protection can be done. Cathodic protection, as I told you, there is no corrosion occurring at the cathode. Corrosion only occurs at the anode. So cathodic protection means you make the structure intentionally as the cathode so as to protect it. So that intentional, you can make it intentionally as the cathode by using a sacrificial anode or by applying an external current source. But one has to take care that hydrogen is liberated from the structure that is protected if you undergoes cathodic protection. care should be taken to avoid hydrogen embrittlement. So you can prevent uniform corrosion, one form of corrosion, but you can end up with a different form of corrosion like hydrogen embrittlement. Another form of protection, anodic protection. So this is only valid for metals which passivate. So we maintain those environmental conditions as such that you are within that region where the passive film is stable, and that gives a very low corrosion rate, even though it's anodic in nature. The metal is anodic. Barrier coatings can be applied. Barrier coatings do not allow the environment to come in contact with the base metal and thus preventing corrosion. It can be thin coatings of metallic or inorganic nature. Metallic coatings are good or preferable because they are formable. If you bend or the metal, the coating will also bend. It will not peel off. That is not so for inorganic coatings. With time, it becomes brittle and peels off easily, exposing the base metal, and corrosion will progress unabated. Porosity should be avoided. Porosity should be avoided in these coatings because the base metal, wherever locally, if it is exposed, then it will lead to enhanced corrosion. Inhibitors can be added to this environment. So inhibitors sort of, as the name suggests, it will inhibit the anodic reaction or the cathodic reaction. If you stop one reaction, the other will automatically get stopped. So the corrosion rate will come down. Various methods of applying barrier coatings: electrodeposition, flame spraying, cladding, hot dipping, vapor deposition like chemical vapor deposition, or physical vapor deposition. I'll now come to the different forms of corrosion and see how to mitigate these forms of corrosion. So you have uniform corrosion or general corrosion, in which, for example, is rusting, which occurs over a large surface area, more or less uniformly. It is defined by the corrosion rate, or the corrosion rate is given in mils per year. And all other forms of corrosion are localized forms of corrosion. Again, localized can be either by macroscopic, where the length scales over which corrosion occurs may be of the order of micrometer to millimeters. Whereas microscopic, the length scale are of atomistic dimensions. So we will see the different forms of corrosion and the mitigation methods. So first is the uniform corrosion. So these are some typical images which you commonly see in a FDT drive. So you can see this corrosion products. It's the most common form of corrosion. This form is responsible for the loss of material. The maximum tonnage of material loss occurs over a large surface area and can be easily taken care of by design by providing that additional corrosion allowance. Control measures: proper material selection, barrier coatings, inhibitors, cathodic protection. So they will help in minimizing uniform corrosion. But when you use highly alloyed alloys like stainless steel, so uniform corrosion there is not a problem. So uniform corrosion rate for stainless steel, say in chloride containing environment, will be very, very low, around 1 to 5 mils per year, but they will undergo very severe form of localized corrosion like pitting corrosion. So a surface affected by pitting corrosion will look like this. So these are small dots and nothing but holes. It's like drilling a hole through the through the thickness, and this is a higher magnification. So the preferred location of initiation are the inclusions. When inclusions are present, they are the preferred location for pit initiation. The environment within the pit is very different from the bulk environment. It can have very high concentration of chlorides, 3 to 10 times the bulk concentration. pH is very low, highly acidic, 2 to 3 pH, and totally deaerated. So you can imagine the bulk environment is very different from the environment within the pit. So if you have a highly flowing condition, then what happens? This environment within the pit gets refreshed very easily. Then in that case, the pit will not grow. So pit growth is favored only in stagnant conditions. So alloys with passive film is more susceptible. Uniform corrosion rate is less, as I told before. So material loss actually is negligible. So weight change, if you measure, weight change will be immeasurable rather. It cannot measure. But however, it can lead to a hole or pit which is breaching the entire wall thickness, and at times if it is under load, this at the tip of the pit, you can have stress concentration. It can also transform to other form of more deleterious forms of corrosion like stress corrosion cracking. So mitigation: use annealed materials. Like if the material is strain hardened, if it is not properly annealed, it has higher tendency to pit. Good surface finish improves the resistance to pitting corrosion. A rough surface will tend to pit more. No sulfide inclusions like this inclusions or oxide inclusions. That such inclusions act as preferred site for pit initiation. So that will again increase your propensity of pitting. Avoid stagnant conditions. As I told before, stagnancy will promote this pit growth. Reduce aggressiveness of the environment, remove crud. If you have particulate matter in a flowing stream, it will tend to deposit on the 6 o'clock location, and it will promote this stagnancy and pitting corrosion. Addition of nitrogen, chromium, nickel, moly in stainless steels will again improve or increase the resistance to pitting corrosion. Like moly containing stainless steel 304, if you add moly, it becomes 316, around 2 to 3% moly, increases resistance to pitting corrosion. If you add nitrogen like 304 LN grades, low carbon nitrogen containing, high resistance to pitting. Also, increase in chromium concentration and nickel concentration increases resistance to pitting corrosion. Crevice corrosion, here when two surfaces are physically in contact, as shown here, so there is always a gap in between. So this gap is of the order of 0.1 to 100 micrometer. So what happens, outside environment now seeps into this gap. So this gap width should be such that it is not too tight so that the environment cannot go inside, then crevice corrosion will not occur. If it is too open, then it will get flushed very easily from the outside environment and crevice corrosion will not occur. Why? Flushing is a problem, or rather why flushing prevents crevice corrosion? Because the environment inside the crevice is similar to that inside a pit, and the same mechanism. So any flushing or flowing conditions rather will prevent crevice corrosion. Some typical images. So this is the washer. These are the preferred location for crevice corrosion. So again, the tube support. So here also your crevice corrosion can occur. So mitigation is mainly by design modification. Avoid such crevice geometry. As I told before, weld instead of rivet. Remove crud or particulate matter as they settle down and promote stagnancy and crevice formation. Cathodic protection can also help in preventing crevice corrosion. The next form of corrosion is galvanic corrosion. So as I told you, every metal has a tendency to corrode, and that's given by its potential. Now, two metals which has a different tendency to corrode, which will have different such potentials. Now, if they are in electrical contact and in exposed to an environment, suppose for this metal A and metal B, metal A suppose is highly prone to corrosion, metal B is less prone to corrosion. If they are in electrical contact, then metal B will preferentially become the cathode. So metal which is more prone corrosion resistant metal will become the cathode. So it will now no longer corrode. And the metal which is less resistant to corrosion will now become the anode, and it will now corrode at a higher rate, much higher rate than that what it would have corroded when they were not in contact. So such galvanic couples can be seen from this galvanic series. So there's a galvanic series in seawater where you find both pure metal as well as alloys, both in active condition and in passive condition. Okay. And you also see this bracket. So if you use two alloys in galvanic or in electrical contact from within a bracket, then galvanic corrosion is less. So how to choose metals? Metals and alloys should not be widely separated. If it's widely separated, then the driving force for corrosion is much higher. So within a group, metals can be used, metals and alloys can be used. Metallic coatings used to reduce separation. So if you cannot avoid electrical contact between two largely separated metals, then you use a coating or a film in between, which is intermediate in this galvanic series, so that that gap reduces. Use of inhibitors, deaeration, cathodic deaeration, inhibitors and deaeration will reduce the corrosivity of the environment. Cathodic protection will help so that both these metals become cathode and they will not corrode. Metallic coatings like galvanizing, so the zinc coating of iron, so that also helps in minimizing galvanic corrosion because ZILF acts as a sacrificial anode and the base iron is protected. Non-metallic inserts, as I told you, that will help because it breaks this electrical contact. If none of this can be done, design in such a way that this more active metal is easily replaceable. So time to time you replace it. Next form of corrosion is intergranular corrosion. So as the name suggests, here the corrosion occurs preferentially at the grain boundaries. So grain boundary is always has a higher tendency to corrode, but under certain conditions, the tendency to corrode increases manifold. So for example, sensitization in austenitic stainless steel, 18H stainless steel, which contains around 0.08% carbon. So during welding, so as shown here, so this is the weld deposit. So this region away from the weld is exposed to this temperature range of 500 to 850. Okay. And not only that, the residence time, so that is given by this temperature temperature variation here. The residence time within this temperature range of 500 to 850 is much longer for this region from B to C. So this curve corresponds to B, point B, and this for point C, this is the curve. So all this region between B and C, the residence time is much more. So what happens? Chromium carbide forms at the grain boundaries, and Cr23C6 is the formula. So one atom of carbon takes away almost 4 atoms of chromium. So you have a chromium depleted region here. So here the chromium concentration falls below that 11%. So this region adjacent to the grain boundary is no longer stainless, but within the grain, it is still stainless steel. So when it is exposed to the environment, grain boundary are the regions where it will corrode preferentially. So these dark regions are the regions of preferential attack along the grain boundaries. Mitigation. So carbon being the responsible alloying element, so reduce carbon to less than 0.03%. So we get the L grades. Addition of molybdenum to 2 to 3% again gives us this 316L grade, which is more resistant to sensitization. So addition of molybdenum reduces sensitization kinetics, so it is more resistant to sensitization. Also, nuclear grade stainless steel, which still further lowers this carbon percentage to 0.02%. So what is the advantage? So if you have a very low carbon to start with, then if you have any pre-existing carbide but non-sensitized stainless steel, so what happens during normal operation in the temperature range of 300 to 350, these carbides will grow over a period of time, say 10 to 15 years, and finally lead to sensitization. So this situation, so this is called low temperature sensitization, where no new carbides precipitate, but pre-existing carbides will grow. So such LTS further lowering carbon minimizes that chance also. Addition of nitrogen not only retards sensitization, but it also brings up the strength level of the stainless steel, because removing carbon, you sacrifice the strength. But you cannot have too much of nitrogen, because if it is in excess of 0.16%, then again, chromium nitride will precipitate and sensitization can occur. Addition of elements such as titanium and niobium, they are strong carbide formers in excess of 900 degrees centigrade. If you give this heat treatment, stabilization heat treatment, then what happens? This titanium and niobium carbides form. So subsequently, no free carbon is available for chromium carbide precipitation and sensitization. But all this stainless steel has to be handled very properly during all stages of fabrication. Why? Because if it is contaminated by grease or any hydrocarbon, and subsequently like during welding, so these hydrocarbons can break and carbon can be picked up, and all that advantage of low carbon will be lost. So in this stainless steel, these are the stabilized grades where you add this titanium and niobium. This is minimum 5% of carbon and nitrogen, and minimum 8% of niobium carbon for niobium stabilized steels. They undergo again another form of IGC called knife line attack, which is immediately adjacent to the weld fusion zone, as opposed to sensitization, which is at some distance away from the weld. So what happens during the first pass of welding? In the region adjacent to the weld fusion zone, the titanium, where the temperature exceeds 1240 degrees centigrade, there the titanium carbide dissociates and free carbon comes into solution. And subsequent multi-pass welding will lead to again chromium carbide precipitation, and again IGC will occur. Selective leaching dealloying, as the name suggests, of an alloy. One alloying component preferentially dissolves out or corrodes out, leaving behind such a porous structure which has very poor mechanical properties. Common examples is dezincification in copper zinc alloys, where zinc dissolves out or corrodes out, and copper is left behind, which is porous. Also for gray cast iron, graphitization it's called, where you have graphite flakes and graphite this network of graphite flakes are left behind and iron dissolves. So again, it's a weak mechanical properties, very poor of this graphite flakes. Mitigation, use different materials like very low zinc brasses, less than 15%. So this problem is more severe in like copper 30% zinc alloys. So if it's less than 15%, its problem is less. Addition of arsenic or tin arsenic will again reduce this problem of selective leaching. So if the alloy or the environment is highly corrosive, instead of zinc alloying, go for nickel alloying. So like cupronickel, that is very conducive for very corrosive environment. The next form of corrosion is stress corrosion cracking. So this is the first time the cracking word comes into the picture. So it means that cracks form. So historical perspective, if I give. So first, it was reported in the brass season cracking of brass, where during World War, the British forces saw that these brass cartridges, which was cold drawn, they cracked during monsoon, and the main reason for cracking was this availability of ammonia due to rotting of organic waste. This being cold drawn, brass cartridges being cold drawn, so they had a lot of residual stresses, tensile stresses, and brass being prone to SCC. So all these three factors led to SCC. Similarly, caustic embrittlement, there was a lot of instances of carbon steel boilers exploding in the United States in the late 1800s. So, and those accidents were the genesis for this ASME, pressure and boiler and pressure vessel code. So the main reason for this IGSCC, it was I will explain what is IGSCC, was presence of caustic soda in the water, tensile stress due to operational stresses, and the material was carbon steel boilers. So you need three factors. You need a material, conducive material, which will tend to crack. So for stainless steels, what is the material condition? Sensitization, low temperature sensitization, and of late, over the last maybe 15 years, even it's seen that even if the stainless steel, austenitic stainless steel is non-sensitized, there is no chromium carbide precipitation, no sensitization, yet it undergoes IGSCC in reactor environment, high temperature, high pressure water, if it is strain hardened. If it is strain hardened, it will undergo IGSCC. So what I mean by IGSCC, two modes of cracking. In one, TGSCC is transgranular, with the cracks grow across the grains, and IG means the crack will grow along the grain boundaries. So some features of SCC, it's a subcritical crack growth mechanism. So even if the crack length is less than the critical crack length, still it will keep on growing. Like from mechanical point of view, as long as the crack is less than the critical crack length and the K, the crack driving force, is less than K1C, that's the fracture toughness, the crack is not supposed to grow. But it can grow due to stress corrosion cracking. So SCC is one of those subcritical crack growth mechanisms. These cracks are, SCC cracks are very tight, and all the corrosion processes are occurring at the crack tip, which are few atoms in crack tip diameter. These are few atoms. Detection of such tight cracks during in-service inspection is very, very difficult. Sizing of cracks is also very difficult. So SCC means the surface which has undergone SCC is more or less free of any corrosion products. So it will be more as it will be shining, clean. So you do not have any telltale visual clues to indicate that some corrosion is occurring there. In SCC, is lifetime is composed of two parts. One is the crack initiation time, which is the majority of the lifetime taken up is stress initiation, almost 90%. But once initiated, it will grow then. It will, the rest of the 10% of the life is taken up in growth of the crack, which is very fast. However, even if you have SCC cracks present, you need not replace it. You can live with cracks as long as you know the crack growth rate. So if you know the crack growth rate, you can have a good estimate how long the crack length from say A1, which was sized during in-service inspection, how long will it take to reach a critical crack length during normal plant operation. So if you know that time estimate, then you can plan your plant shutdowns accordingly. A multitude of mechanisms have been proposed for to explain SCC, which indicates that it's still not fully understood. And this SCC occurs in the potential region where the passive film is highly stable. So even though uniform corrosion does not occur, stress corrosion cracking occurs. How to minimize this? We are talking about stainless steels now. So nickel content has a very important role to play. So this is in boiling magnesium chloride test, which evaluates the susceptibility to SCC. It's an ASTM standard test. So if you see around 8 to 10% nickel, you see the minimum time to failure, indicating that the cracking is very fast. So, so this is the alloy composition for SS304. It contains around 8 to 10% nickel. So 304 will crack very quickly in boiling magnesium chloride. So nickel, as I told you, nickel concentration is very important. So this is another curve for showing the SCC susceptibility in high temperature water. So here see all this nickel concentrations. There's a wide variation range of nickel concentration where you have very low susceptibility to SCC. So I will highlight 3 alloys. Alloy 800, which is the steam generator tube used in our nuclear power plants, and it lies in this base of this bucket, which indicates it has very low SCC susceptibility. So we have very good experience in our nuclear reactors, no IGSCC occurrences. Similarly, for alloy 690 also, very low susceptibility to IGSCC. But alloy 600, which was initially used as steam generator tube material, it has very high susceptibility to IGSCC in this high temperature water simulating nuclear environment. So all this material is good enough if it is handled properly. So what I have shown here in this figure is certain things that can go wrong during fabrication stage or during handling or during storage, which can compromise this high resistance to SCC. So if this stainless steel comes in contact with non-stainless steel equipment, like say carbon steel, then there's every chance that a small chip of iron can get embedded, can break off from those carbon steel tools and embed into the stainless steel surface. Now this stainless iron is prone to corrosion, it will corrode, rust, and there is a volume expansion which will lead to generation of local tensile stresses. And during long-term storage or during operation, or when this part gets exposed to suppose a marine environment, so even at room temperature, under presence of chlorides, it will undergo TGSCC, and the SCC will crack will grow. So there are various standard methods. ASTM standard method like A380 gives a procedure for detecting such iron contamination, along with its cleaning procedure. Some environmental control steps that you can do: eliminate the critical environment necessary for SCC. As in this figure shows, the combination dissolved oxygen and chloride concentration is very important. So this is the SCC safe area. So low dissolved oxygen levels, if you have totally deaerated, very, very low dissolved oxygen, then you can control, tolerate more higher concentration of chloride without occurrences of TGSCC. But if the dissolved oxygen is high, then you cannot tolerate very high concentration. The chloride concentration has to be very low, means the water purity has to be very low. It has to be very good for SCC resistance. Cathodic protection can help. As I told, during cathodic protection, hydrogen is evolved, and hydrogen related SCC is one of the mechanisms. So hydrogen aids in SCC growth, growth. So if that is the mechanism operative, then cathodic protection will not help. Design modification can do lower the stresses. If the stresses are low, crack growth rate will be low. Tensile stresses are needed for SCC to initiate and grow. So instead of tensile, you can introduce surface compressive stresses. That can be done by shot peening. So very high hardness balls, shots impinged or repeatedly onto the surface, that introduces compressive stresses onto the surface, and that will prevent your SCC initiation. Some stopgap measurements you can take. So like heat sink welding or last part heat sink welding. So it's mainly for say pipelines. So when you're welding two pipelines, SS pipelines, after the root pass, you pass cold water from the ID side when you are doing the subsequent passes to fill up that gap. So what happens, because of the water, the internal surfaces of the SS will not rise to temperatures reaching that 500 to 850, so that sensitization will be avoided. Also, this last pass heat sink welding, in which you pass this cold water in the last pass of the welding. So what it does is that it will introduce revert of this residual stresses to compressive, residual tensile stresses to compressive stresses on the ID side. That will again help in preventing SCC. But these are of course temporary measures operating the plant till your safely till your next shutdown. Hydrogen damage, as the name suggests, hydrogen enters into the metal. Hydrogen is present in the metal in the atomic form H, and that will cause damage to the metal. What are the sources of hydrogen? Cathodic reaction is one source, so where the hydrogen can be packed up onto the metal. Cathodic protection also. During cathodic protection, hydrogen is liberated, so hydrogen can enter into the metal. In the environment, in the water environment, if you have ions of phosphorus, arsenic, antimony, so these also promote hydrogen pickup by this steel. Another source of hydrogen is during welding. During welding and heat treatments, like if you're welding carbon steel plates and this weld electrode flux, if it has moisture present in it, then that moisture can dissociate under welding arc temperatures and can give rise to generate hydrogen, which can go into the metal weld metal and called embrittlement. So what are the different types of damage? Hydrogen blistering. Hydrogen blistering occurs if you have pores inside the metal. So this atomic hydrogen will diffuse into those pores, and inside the pores they will recombine and form hydrogen molecule gas. So once the gas forms molecule, it cannot then come out of those closed pores, and it will lead to high amount of internal pressure, high internal pressure that will lead to rupture of the steel, even though the external load is very, very low, because it will internal pressure will add up to that external load. Hydrogen embrittlement, if hydrogen is present in the metal, it increases the embrittlement or reduces ductility. Decarburization and dehydrogen attack. Hydrogen attack mainly occurs at high temperature, moist environment in which the hydrogen reacts with one of the alloying elements in the steel. So like it can react with carbon and remove the carbon from the steel surface. As you can see here, it gets decarburized. Problem is, if you remove carbon, the strength comes down, so the material becomes weak. Hydrogen attack inside the metal also at high temperatures can react with carbon and form such bubbles. So these bubbles of methane can form inside. So this is CH4, carbon react with hydrogen and form methane. And again, the problem is due to internal pressurization. Another problem is stress corrosion cracking. As I told you, SCC is one mechanism of hydrogen-related SCC is one mechanism. So if that mechanism is operative, presence of hydrogen will aggravate the situation. So mitigation, blistering you can avoid by avoiding pores. Use clean steel so that do not have any pores inside. If the steel is clad by stainless steel or nickel, which is impervious to hydrogen, then hydrogen will not be picked up. Reduce corrosion, hydrogen generation will be reduced. Remove poisons like arsenic, antimony in the environment, that will reduce hydrogen pickup. Use better materials. Better materials means higher the strength of the material, more prone it is to hydrogen embrittlement or hydrogen damage. Softer materials, low strength materials have better resistance to hydrogen damage. So if you're talking about steel, so like martensite is one high hardness phase. So if a lot of martensite is present, then the steel is very hard and it has very, very poor resistance to hydrogen embrittlement. Or if it's like very soft, if it has a ferrite pearlite microstructure, then it will have higher resistance to hydrogen embrittlement. Hydrogen embrittlement, again, reduce corrosion rate. Altering plating conditions. Electroplating, the material to be plated is made as the cathode where hydrogen evolves. So altering plating conditions can minimize this hydrogen evolution and hydrogen pickup. If hydrogen is picked up, you can always bake it out at around in this temperature range of 100 to 650. So the hydrogen, if it comes out, then again, you restore the original ductility of the material. Lower strength materials are better. So as I tell, during welding, one has to take utmost care that welding electrodes are completely dry. So this welding electrodes have to be baked nicely before welding. So this welding electrode should be removed from this furnace, baking furnace, immediately or just before welding. It should be directly taken for welding after retrieving from the furnace, so that it does not have any chance of moisture pickup. Biological corrosion is not a separate form of corrosion. It's it's mainly due to bioactivity on the material, like such barnacles sticking onto the surface, presence of algae, presence of fungus on the metal surface. So they affect corrosion by directly influencing anodic and cathodic reaction. It can enhance one of the reaction rates. It can, if cathodic reaction rate is enhanced, anodic reaction will automatically get enhanced. Influencing protected surface films. Surface films can be compromised due to the bioactivity, exposing the base metal and higher corrosion. Aggravating corrosion conditions: produce acids locally, produce deposits. Okay, if you have deposits, you will have stagnant conditions. It will promote pitting corrosion and crevice corrosion like situation. So finally, to summarize, so for corrosion to occur, you need 4 factors: material, an anodic reaction, cathodic reaction, and a conducting electrolyte. And you can prevent corrosion and control it by proper material selection, taking care of the alloy composition, microstructure, cold work, taking adequate steps during design. These 2 steps can be taken before the material goes into service, and during service you can control the environment by purity, minimize that concentration of corrosive species, composition of the environment, barrier coatings, temperature, pH, oxygen, agitation, and inhibitors, addition to the inhibitors to the environment. So all of them will control your corrosion. So corrosion at many times you'll see you cannot prevent it, but you can control it. Then your life will be easier. So with that, I will conclude. I thank you for your patient hearing. And I also hope you all are doing well during this pandemic situation. And I wish you all the best. Thank you.